Human trafficking. We know that in East and Southeast Asia, men, women and children are trafficked out of, into and within our region. The figures are hotly contested, that is true. But we can say with some confidence that worldwide there are millions of modern slaves being traded at prices not significantly higher in real terms than what their historical counterparts fetched during the era of formal slavery. That's something to reflect on, during the era of formal slavery. Thought we'd moved away from that. But in many, many ways, in various dens and various places, you come across aspects of slavery, whether people are being trafficked as domestic workers, trafficking to prostitution, trafficked onto fishing boats, talking about the trend that is taking place in Southeast Asia, where men are being basically press-ganged, put onto shrimp trawlers. And a lot of the food that we are eating is basically produced effectively by slave labor. Now, it is true that much of this trafficking occurs between countries of the same region. But our research also shows striking evidence of a significant intercontinental trafficking involving East and Southeast Asia. Most remarkably, the victims from East Asia have been detected in more than 20 countries way beyond our region, including Europe, the Americas, Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. And the main tragedy in all of this, the main tragedy, is the impunity that we see. It was, I don't know if you caught the article in the New York Times or International Herald Tribune over the weekend about a lady who was rescuing victims in Eastern Europe, Bulgaria it is. And she, when interviewed by the Times, said, she doesn't understand it. You play around with drugs, you get arrested for trafficking, you're in for 20 years. You ruin some young girl's life. In most cases, the players are handling batches of tens to hundreds of women. They will get 6 years. Impunity. In proportion to the assumed extent of the problem, the number of arrests and prosecutions and convictions is very low. On top of this, we still don't know what is the real extent of human trafficking. And as a result, we don't know whether the actions that we are taking are having any real impact at all. So we must strengthen the criminal justice response to human trafficking. There are solutions. They exist. We must apply them. I'll come to that again in the section where we talk about solutions. Migrant smuggling. I've noticed that there are colleagues from DIAC here, and I'm very happy to say that we are happy to work with DIAC and other organizations in the region to counter migrant smuggling and promote safe migration. In our region, there are two main countries of origin for smuggled migrants when we look at long-distance smuggling. These are Vietnam and, most importantly, China. Moreover, Southeast Asia is an important transit region for migrant smuggling from West and South Asia to Australia. I know that there will be a distinguished speaker coming on board from Indonesia, and we also work closely with Indonesia to counter this, because many of the migrants are actually shipped through the Indonesian islands. Much of this movement is facilitated by migrant smugglers. In fact, a large amount of it is facilitated by migrant smugglers. Profits are high, and the criminals generally face few risks of detection or punishment. As a result, migrant smuggling is a high-profit, low-risk crime. And I think that part of the strategy, part of the attempt of organized law enforcement and criminal justice mechanisms in our region must be to try to reverse that formula. No longer high profit and low risk. Because the criminal networks prefer methods that minimize their risk, this often puts the safety and lives of the smuggled migrants in danger. In recent times, the death toll associated with migrant smuggling has dramatically increased. Migrant smuggling has therefore now also become a deadly business. And let's not also forget that migrant smuggling is a business that exposes migrants to the risk of exploitation and trafficking, both during the migrant smuggling process and then after it is completed. The fourth and final area that I'd like to try to shine some sidelight on this afternoon is environmental crime. Southeast Asia is home to some of the world's most extensive networks of tropical forests and diverse flora and fauna. Unfortunately, and mainly over the past 20 years, poor forest management and weak law enforcement have resulted in these valuable natural resources becoming threatened by illegal logging and the illicit trade in forest products, known collectively as forest crimes. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, you see the head of it turning up every week to talk on television about climate change. They estimate that cutting down the forest is now contributing 20% of the overall greenhouse gases which are emitted into the atmosphere. So for our region, and especially the ASEAN countries, with their vast forest resources, addressing illegal logging is of prime importance if we are to mitigate climate change through the reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation initiatives, called RED initiative. There's a big article on it in The Economist about 2-3 weeks ago, how to save the world's lungs, the planet's lungs. I was privileged last week to be scampering around in the same rainforests in Sulawesi Island, right in the center of the Indonesian archipelago. And fact is that we are losing a lot of our top cover. And so that's bad news. There are successes around the planet. Brazil has made a major effort. But the key is to prevent the destruction illegally and the logging. And that means working with the communities, and that also means enforcing the law. There are things that can be done. There are plans in place. They require resources. Some countries have already contributed significantly to this very important dimension, which has the impact or potential impact of saving the planet, frankly. So these are just 4 examples of what I think we are up against. How are we doing on time, sir? All right. Halfway through the presentation. Moving now to try to articulate some of the solutions. 5 of them. First one, talked about by, I think, each of the previous speakers. The need to know the threat better. One of the biggest problems we face in analyzing transnational organized crime is our lack of accurate information. Technology has flattened time and space. So you'd think that we should know what is going on around the planet at any given moment, wouldn't you? Well, we don't. There are many, many forgotten places outside of government control. Places too scary for investors and tourists to venture into. These are places precisely where smugglers, insurgents, and in some cases terrorists operate from. In many instances, they do so unperturbed and they do so undetected. They run fleets of ships and planes and trucks and containers carrying tons of weapons and drugs and people. And their activities are often discovered, in fact, only by chance. The crash of some phantom plane, the fortuitous seizure of an illicit cargo. I smiled this morning when Mr. Overland was talking about the surveillance that they were running on this ship that kept going out into the Pacific and coming back on. They discovered that actually the mothership had just run out of fuel, or it was somehow had broken down. I've seen this also many times in my own region in the Eastern Caribbean, because we have quite a number of drug smugglers coming up in pirogues off the Venezuelan coast on a nightly basis when these surveillance planes go out. And they get caught for some of the most, from our perspective, simple and often simple-minded reasons. So when you see a drug ship running out of fuel, that's sometimes how we find out that something is happening. So our picture has to improve. Our policy must be based on solid evidence. We cannot keep groping around in the dark. And again, I return to what Simon Overland was talking about this morning. We tend to be drawn to the visible, to what we see. And we think we know what we know. But the real question, to repeat it for a third time, is how can we find out what we don't know? How do we know what we don't know? There's a second reason why we need accurate information, and that is to be able to measure the progress that we are making in tackling the problem. We have no baselines in many cases on the really important harms that are being done through transnational organized crime. Please allow me then to share with you the following practical proposal. I have drawn attention to the Global Transnational Organized Crime Threat Assessment Report. It contains a smattering of information on East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Our plan in the regional center in Bangkok is to prepare a regional TOCTA for East Asia and the Pacific. This effort, please note, will not undermine efforts that are already being undertaken. It will only complement them. And I call upon colleagues in the room to consider contributing to this regional TOCTA. Please help us with your brains. Please help us with your resources. Help us to build an independent, accurate, and policy-oriented TOCTA for our region. Let me share with you now on screen the areas where we are planning to try to develop additional knowledge. I'm not going to walk you through all this. So as I talk, you'll be able to read it yourself. I will, however, draw your attention to something that Bill Hughes mentioned this morning. And that's talked about, sorry guys on this side of the room, I can't, it's not going to work if I do it there, so I'll just do it here. Where are we? Yes, counterfeit medicines. Here, and basically the overall thing of counterfeit goods. This is a major issue. And all of the speakers this morning, in the morning session, talked about the seamless movement between licit and illicit goods. And the fact that the transnational organized crime syndicates are exploiting that movement between the two markets. The reason why counterfeit medicines is serious is not just because of quality assurance. It's not just because of the safety that it poses if people are taking spurious medicines. It's not just about the fact that the state then doesn't get the necessary tax revenue from the production of these products. One of the key issues about it is a public health issue. It relates to evolution, basically, and the way in which microbes can develop a resistance to a specific type of medication if it is not dosed properly, and if it's adulterated and diluted. And that's one of the most serious public health problems that we have right now, and this is contributing to it. So, to return to the script, it's not a complete list, I would agree, but it's a start. Some of these areas are already being analyzed, and we are making suggestions as to how to improve our response in these areas. I'd like to thank, at this point, the governments, some present here today, in fact, which have the foresight to financially support what we're doing. More needs to be done, but acquiring knowledge will be one way of getting us to there.